Everyone here in the room, members of the press, ambassadors, as well as those watching us on our webcast. Welcome. Anyone who desires interpretation, we have it available here in the room just over this way. And if you're watching on the webcast, it's just a matter of clicking the appropriate language. Today, we're going to hear from the electoral observation mission of the OAS to the elections, the general elections in the United States. Let me introduce briefly those here on the stage. Of course, the Chief of Mission and former President of Costa Rica, Laura Chinchilla. The OAS Secretary for Strengthening Democracy, Francisco Guerrero. The OAS Director of the Department of Electoral Cooperation and Observation, Gerardo de Icaza. And the Deputy Chief of Mission, Brenda Santamaria. In terms of format, first we're going to hear the preliminary report from the Chief of Mission. Following the report, we'll open the floor to questions. Questions that can be addressed to any of the participants. We only ask that you please tell us your name and the name of the media you represent, and that you ask your question into the microphone so that everyone can hear the translation. And with that, I will turn it over to the Chief of Mission.
Thank you so much, Mr. Morgan, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here with us in the presentation of our preliminary report. In response to an invitation from the State Department of the United States of America, the Organization of American States deployed its first ever electoral mission to observe the November 8 general elections. The mission comprised of 41 experts and observers from 18 different countries, was deployed 1 week prior to the election day. Because of the decentralized nature of the United States electoral system, the mission coordinated with individual states in order to observe their voting processes. On election day, we were present in the following states: California, Colorado, Iowa, Kansas, Maryland, Minnesota, Montana, Nebraska, New York, Rhode Island, Virginia, and Wisconsin, as well as the District of Columbia. Some states do not allow or lack specific provisions for regulated international observation. For future electoral processes, the OAS will welcome that these states consider the benefits of receiving international observers and reflect this in their local legislation. One such state, Pennsylvania, provided the mission with information and the opportunity to visit electoral officials prior to the election on a preliminary mission that also included the state of Georgia. To select the states for deployment, the following criteria was utilized: a state that allow international observers, geographic representation, political tendency, and plurality of electoral systems and organization. This selection process has allowed the mission to obtain a broad perspective of the various aspects observed in the U.S. electoral process. As in every mission deployed by the organization, in this occasion, we observed specific areas of the electoral process in a systematic way, including electoral organization, the use of technology in elections, political participation, and financing and media coverage. On election day, the members of the mission were tasked with observing all the activities carried out at voting precincts from the opening until the return of materials to the corresponding local authorities. Throughout the day, our team observed various voting systems and procedures, which included the use of paper ballots, postal voting, optical and digital scanners, and direct recording electronic voting machines with and without paper trails. Similarly, the mission observed different levels of identification requirements to vote. Citizens appeared to understand the process and were able to correctly cast their vote in a reasonable amount of time, considering the different choices on the ballot. The polling places observed by the mission opened on time, had all the essential electoral materials on hand, and were managed by dedicated citizens and in an orderly manner, notwithstanding the large amount of people waiting in line. Observers reported long lines, especially early in the morning and in the afternoon, with waiting times of over an hour in some cases. Occasionally, long lines were a result of sporadic technical malfunctions with electoral equipment such as scanners, or as in the case of Colorado, with a statewide Colorado registration and election system, which collapsed for about 20 minutes. These technical challenges, however, were solved efficiently following the contingency procedures that were in place. Polling places were, in general terms, adequate, but in some cases they were small for the amount of machines and people concentrated in the same place. While the trust of the citizens allowed the process to continue running smoothly, it is suggested that local authorities consider this matter in order to avoid overcrowding and ensure that citizens can cast their ballots in secret. The mission observed large amounts of women and senior citizens taking different roles at polling places throughout the country. Despite their limited knowledge of international observation, poll workers received OAS observers in a friendly and open manner. Similarly, the mission observed workers giving priority to senior citizens and people with disabilities, as well as pregnant women. The mission will like to highlight the remarkable efforts made by electoral authorities to facilitate access to people with disabilities through the use of special devices and initiatives such as drive-through polling places, observed in Colorado and in California, or the option to have ballots brought to your car, such as in Kansas. The mission will also like to highlight the culture of service and professionalism of electoral officials observed across the different states. During the organization of the election, these workers provided voters with a safe and convenient way to vote. The United States electoral system presents several characteristics that made it unique in the hemisphere. One of these aspects is the Electoral College, by which the President is elected through an indirect vote consisting of the accumulation of electoral votes tallied state by state, as opposed to the most common electoral practice of direct election through popular vote. The immense variety of election laws, rules, and voting mechanisms is embedded in the decentralized nature of the United States system. How these different states coexist in elections at a national level make it truly unique. Organization is left to state, county, and township levels in some cases, varying in their degree of centralization. For this election, most states had a method in place to cast a ballot before Election Day, either during the early voting period or by recasting an absentee ballot. In 38 states, including 3 that mail ballots to all voters, individuals could vote in person with no justification required. According to the information reported, more than 47 million citizens voted before Election Day. This method is generally accepted by the voting population and administrations alike, since each state is responsible for developing its own electoral registry, and there is no obligation on their part to share this information with other states or to integrate them at the national level. One person could potentially vote more than once for the same election. As such, the mission recommends that states continue to utilize and expand existing mechanisms to share and compare information in order for each state to avoid duplicity of registration for the same election. The biased design of electoral districts, known as gerrymandering, has been a historic issue in United States electoral processes. In various states, the mission observed a partition design of the electoral districts for the House of Representatives, which affects the competitiveness of these elections. In California and Iowa, two states observed by the mission, the design of electoral districts is drawn by an independent, non-partisan commission. This practice guarantees clear standards in the definition of district lines, thus increasing the possibilities for political alternation. In this context, the mission recognizes the establishment of independent commissions for the design of electoral districts as a better practice. Another aspect in which the United States system differs from others in the hemisphere is related to voter identification. Practically all countries in the region provide at least one free form of national identification to their citizens, which is used for electoral purposes. In the United States, 32 states currently have laws in force that require voters to show some form of prescribed identification to verify their identity before casting a vote. Proponents of these laws justify them as a means to prevent in-person voter fraud and increase public confidence in the electoral process. Opponents cite the lack of evidence that such fraud occurs and argue that such laws impose unnecessary fiscal and administrative burdens on election administrators. Opponents further argue that restrictive voters' ID laws serve to disenfranchise otherwise eligible voters and have a disproportionate impact on low-income and minority voters who are less likely to possess the prescribed types of identification and who may experience difficulty acquiring it. In terms of political participation, this election was the first since 1965 to take place without full protection of the Voting Rights Act, a law designed with the express purpose of protecting the abridgment of denial of voting rights to any citizen on account of race, color, or language groups. In 2013, the Supreme Court struck down several sections of the Act. The mission recommends that the impact of this decision taken by the Supreme Court be analyzed with hard data. The mission takes note that the rules that govern the bipartisan structure of the Federal Election Commission make it difficult to effectively conduct oversight and enforcement of campaign finance law. The campaign finance regime is the most deregulated it has been in 40 years. And for this election, it relied mostly on private money. As a result of the Supreme Court ruling in Citizens United versus FEC, spending limits are unconstitutional unless candidates accept public funding. As a result, the role of outside spending in elections, particularly from independent expenditure-only committees, also known as super PACs, has increased. Although difficult to enforce, super PACs cannot coordinate their independent expenditure with candidates or parties. New, more precise, and stricter coordination rules that address super PACs in particular will benefit the level of transparency of the financing system, as it may potentially minimize backdoor influence and the collusion of interests. The mission comments to work of the FEC with respect to the enforcement of current disclosure requirements. Candidates, PACs, super PACs, and other outside groups periodically file reports to the FEC, including contributions and expenditures, and such information is available online within 48 hours. The mission analyzed media coverage of the campaign. The two major party candidates received significant coverage by TV, radio, and print outlets. The mission observed that digital and social media broadened the impact of news and commentary. According to a survey of the Pew Research Center, 3 in 10 Americans turned to the 2016 presidential candidates' digital messages for news and information about the election. The candidates' social media posts outpace their websites and emails as sources of this news. A large media market and fierce competition among the biggest media groups delivered thousands of hours of electoral coverage for diverse audiences. The mission found coverage of both candidates to be, for the most part, equal in time and more personally oriented rather than policy-driven. The mission also observed with concern a rise in polarizing and divisive rhetoric during the campaign that could be interpreted as having racial undertone. Furthermore, threats by one candidate to take judicial action against journalists for expressing their views and restricting their access to cover events were worrisome. The mission hopes that these expressions were all part of campaign rhetoric and civil dialogue will prevail among opposing views. The strength of the United States democracy goes beyond the particularities of an electoral process. It is based on its institutional strength, freedom of expression and press, balance of power, the rule of law, and the principles of which this country was founded. Amidst accusations of a rigged election system, the reality is that citizens trust their institutions. The immense amounts of checks and balances throughout the process, the right to redress and appeal decisions, the effectiveness of the courts, and the transparency and publicity of the process are paramount in the contribution of that trust. Our mission also analyzed issues related to women's access to the political arena. We observed that the absence of quotas for political participation and the possibility of re-election made the growth of female participation in elected positions very difficult. In this electoral process, for instance, the preliminary results indicate that the number of women in the House of Representatives could decrease to 85 in comparison with the 104 states that are currently held by women. This mission would like to highlight the need to promote actions and policies that encourage the presence of women in leading elected positions, in line with the significant progress in the Western Hemisphere in this matter. The mission would like to express its gratitude to the National Association of Secretaries of States, the National Conference of State Legislators, the National Association of State Election Directors, the United States Election Assistance Commission, the Federal Election Commission, the federal government, and all the institutions and individuals that kindly opened their doors to the members of the mission. We also would like to thank the donors whose generous support made the deployment of this mission possible, including Bolivia, Chile, the Dominican Republic, and Mexico, as well as to the experts, observers, and members of the OAS General Secretariat for their hard work and efforts that allow us to surpass the objectives we originally set out for this mission. We also wish to recognize OAS Secretary General Luis Almagro for his support and confidence. Finally, the mission commends United States citizenry who yesterday both carried out and participated in an important election day. Even in the context of a strong and controversial campaign, we witnessed an electoral process during which citizens were able to express their differences through institutional mechanisms in a free and respectful manner. It is this attitude that should inspire this country's political leadership in order to meet the complex but urgent task of uniting a nation around the quest for common goals. In that regard, we celebrate Mrs. Hillary Clinton's great democratic ambition in recognizing the electoral results and offering her collaboration to the next president. We congratulate Mr. Donald Trump, who will become the 45th President of the United States and the inheritor of an institutional legacy of democratic values, freedom, and tolerance. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We can now open the floor to questions. Once again, if you could just identify yourself and the media you represent and ask your questions into the microphone so those online can hear. Feel free, siéntense libre de formular las preguntas en inglés o español. ¿Preguntas?
Are there any questions?
Clear? We are willing to receive questions in Spanish and in English, so feel free to ask in whatever language you feel more comfortable. Señor Embajador.
Mr. Ambassador? Good afternoon. My question is addressed to the Secretary regarding the strengthening of democracy. And what is the difference? My question is this observation as regards to others that have been conducted in Latin America. With the authorization of the former president of Costa Rica, Laura Chinchilla, head of mission, this observation mission obviously has been indeed a unique experience for our Secretariat because the political model of the United States of America has characteristics which are very different from those of many of the democracies that make up our continent. The fact that there is this gigantic decentralization as far as the entities that make up the Union of the US of A impacted us from the technical standpoint in order to be able to select a number of bodies that would be representative of the North, South, East, and
para poder hacer también una valoración política sobre cuáles serían los estados más relevantes, pero sobre todo todos los desafíos de carácter técnico en un sistema electoral que tiene un nivel importante de tecnificación. La tecnología forma parte central del proceso político norteamericano y, por supuesto, el tamaño de la democracia norteamericana, que es un país pues tan grande. También, evidentemente, poder contar con observadores especialistas en esta materia señaló un desafío. Yo quiero aprovechar para agradecer a todas las secretarías de la organización que amablemente contribuyeron con el personal para poder llevar a cabo este proceso de observación. Hay que reconocer que era una experiencia novedosa, incluso para los propios jueces y autoridades electorales que no habían visto con anterioridad estos chalecos que portamos y que hemos portado en otros 27 países de la organización. Terminaría diciendo que quizá otra de las diferencias sustantivas que no estamos acostumbrados en otros países de la región es el hecho de que la determinación de resultados se da durante el trayecto de la tarde-noche. Supongo que algunos de ustedes estarán un poco desvelados después de haber observado la información que se vierte en las cadenas de televisión, de radio y ahora sobre todo de Internet. Había que estar verificando en tiempo real virtualmente la información, y en nuestros países de la región normalmente existe una autoridad nacional centralizada que es la que brinda los resultados, que es la que también hace procesos jurisdiccionales. Es decir, estamos hablando de una democracia única en ese sentido, pero reconocer también que, como se dice en el informe, la participación de la Asociación de Secretarios de Estado fue central para poder llevar a cabo este proceso. Creo que el informe que habremos de presentar en el Consejo Permanente será una buena contribución, no solo para los países miembros, sino también para la academia, porque pues nunca habíamos tenido la posibilidad de llevar a cabo un ejercicio como este en una democracia tan importante como es la democracia de los Estados Unidos.
Adelante. Por favor, el micrófono, sí podría, Cristina.
Buenas tardes, Cristina García de la agencia EFE. Me gustaría saber cuáles aspectos son mejorables de la democracia estadounidense, del sistema electoral de Estados Unidos, y si se han visto alguna de las irregularidades que se denunciaron en la campaña. Gracias.
Sí, bueno, el informe, como pudieron ver, está lleno de recomendaciones de aspectos que pudieran mejorar, desde financiamiento hasta redistritación y cuestiones mucho más técnicas. Sí estuvimos en Colorado y pudimos ver el, digamos, apagón del sistema durante 20 minutos, pero de la misma forma vimos que en todos los casos donde hubo irregularidades hay una serie de planes de contingencia que se siguen al pie de la letra, hay una planeación previa, hay una publicidad en todos los actos y todas las decisiones que se toman, lo cual da grandes garantías en el proceso.
Ariel Córdoba, del Centro Político Interamericano. ¿Qué tanto consideran que impactó el voto retroactivo o el voto de castigo al establishment en los resultados de estas elecciones?
No, en las misiones de observación no especulan, observan. Entonces, la realidad es que un análisis de esa naturaleza no correspondería a la misión.
Any other questions?
No. Bueno, estaríamos entonces, yo quisiera, para cerrar esta tarea que nos fue encomendada, agradecer finalmente al embajador Sullivan, que se encuentra aquí hoy con nosotros, porque de alguna manera fue pues quien finalmente hizo posible que se concretaran esfuerzos de muchos años para poder conseguir esa histórica misión de observación en las elecciones de los Estados Unidos. Confiamos que no sea la última y que sin lugar a dudas, y es quizá lo que a la par del agradecimiento al embajador Sullivan quisiera dejar como palabras finales, que en última instancia lo que hace es dos cosas. Primero, recordar a la comunidad internacional que siempre hay espacios para perfeccionar las democracias y que aun cuando estemos hablando de democracias con altos grados de desarrollo, es posible aún hacer más. Y que en consecuencia las misiones de observación de la OEA están hechas o han venido evolucionando para ello. Cada vez más ir a democracias más sólidas, más consolidadas, más evolucionadas, compartir buenas prácticas y dar recomendaciones relevantes. Y finalmente que, pues en el fondo, no hay la menor duda de que fue un gran gesto de espaldarazo a un gran equipo que hace parte de la Secretaría de Fortalecimiento de la Democracia y del Departamento de Cooperación Electoral, que sin lugar a dudas concentran las mejores prácticas de observación electoral a nivel internacional. Y por eso, pues simplemente decirles que me ha honrado ser parte de este equipo, tener a gente tan profesional al frente y saber que a través de ello hemos puesto también un grano de arena adicional para fortalecer el trabajo de la Organización de Estados Americanos en nuestro hemisferio. Muchas gracias de nuevo a todos por habernos acompañado.
There are copies of the preliminary report available here in the hall and on the website of the OAS. Copies available both here and online. Thank you.